The Haunting of Venta del Astillero, Unveiling the Witch's Legacy. Scary story. My name is Jazmín, and during my childhood, I was tormented by a woman who lived in the upper floor of our house. During my childhood, we lived as a family in a large house in the town of Venta del Astillero. I remember that things were going very well until the crisis of 1996 arrived, and many people began to lose their jobs. My father was no exception, and we went through very strong economic problems in the family. It hit us so hard that we had to convert the house into a duplex and rent the upstairs. My siblings and I were left without our own rooms. My parents said it would be temporary but difficult to adapt to the change. One day, when I came back from school, my parents told me that they had managed to rent the upper floor. It was an old woman who was not very friendly because the first time I saw her, she did not give me much confidence because I could feel that with her gaze, she could scrutinize even my soul. I am the oldest of three, so I had to share a room with my younger sister Beatriz, while my brother Josu slept in the living room, and my parents in another room that used to be the study. There were 5 of us living on the first floor, all cramped together, while the old lady had a second floor with several rooms just for herself. At night, it was not so easy to fall asleep, because that woman seemed to walk everywhere with a stick, especially because she seemed to hit the floor with full intention on the floor of what was my room. Sometimes it would be 2 o'clock in the morning, and we still could not get to sleep. We told our parents how annoying that old lady was, and they decided to go and talk to her. She didn't receive them very kindly. In fact, she ran my parents off the top floor, arguing that it was her house, and they couldn't tell her what she could or couldn't do. This bothered my father so much that he made the decision to run her out. After all, the real owner was my dad. But it seemed that destiny had another way, because before the first month of that old woman's life was over, and she paid, she died. The smell of a dead animal is very strong, but the smell of a dead human being is much worse. So we realized that the woman had been dead for several days. My father had to break down the door, accompanied by a couple of policemen. My brother Joshua and I accompanied them. They found the old woman with a sunken face and more wrinkles than when I last saw her. She was almost in the bones and smelled terrible. One of the policemen approached and moved her arm, but her hands were clasped over her chest and seemed to be tightly clutched. The other policeman said a phrase that I will never forget. What the dead take hold of, they never let go. While they examined the body and took notes, my brother and I inspected the rooms. We realized that the old woman did not lead a very ordinary life. Corresponding to an elderly woman, we found jars with herbs, and inside, I could notice that she had scorpions and spiders swimming in alcohol. She had black candles melted almost completely on the wooden table, which my father lent her at the beginning of renting the place. My brother found white chalk and several pentagrams drawn on the floor. However, what disturbed me the most was that I saw a photograph of our family stuck on the wall, the 5 of us smiling. But everyone's eyes were scratched except mine. I never knew how that woman managed to get hold of that picture, but if I showed it to my father, he began to say that it was witchcraft and it was necessary to get rid of everything. This was the straw that broke the camel's back, because from then on my father was determined to throw everything away without caring if it was important or if it had something cursed or possessed. The days went by, and until everything was clean again, my father announced the duplex again. I remember that the days went by while the upstairs was empty and we spent our time playing upstairs. We had a second floor without furniture and things that would get in our way, so sometimes I would play with a rubber ball. I would sit leaning on my back against a wall and throw the ball hard to catch it. I didn't know what my brothers were doing. What I did know was that each one was in a room by themselves. I didn't know what my brothers were doing. What I did know was that each one of them was in a room by themselves. 2 minutes passed when I heard my sister asking me to go quickly. I got up from the floor and ran to the room. She was huddled in a corner with her face between her knees. I asked her what was going on, and she assured me that she saw someone pass in the hallway and go into the room where Josu was. I told her that maybe it was our brother, but she swore that she saw a much taller and bigger person. It occurred to me to yell at Josu, but he didn't answer. I had no choice but to go check, but my sister grabbed my arm, begging me not to do it. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I managed to see someone go into the room where I was before and start playing with the ball. I breathed a sigh of relief, imagining that it was Joshua. So I told my sister to follow me, and we went out to enter that room. But I don't know what happened that a familiar shivering sensation ran through my skin. I could hear inside me that something was telling me stop. I could see a skeletal hand, very similar to the old woman's, bounce the ball off the wall. And before I could take another step, the doors of all the rooms closed at the same time, and a horrible voice was heard shaking even the windows, telling us to get the hell out of my house. We ran out through the main entrance, and when we got to the second floor, we met Joshua, who was already carrying a bag full of toys. He asked us what had happened, as it seemed we had seen a ghost. I pointed him to the top floor. Joshua didn't want to believe us, but as soon as he set foot on the metal staircase, which led him to the front door, it closed tightly on its own. We didn't hesitate to tell Dad what happened to us, and fortunately, we had a father who believed everything we said. He thought that asking a priest to pour holy water would do the trick, and the nightmare would be over. So he told us that on the weekend we would all go to Mass and tell the priest what had happened. The problem was that it was still a Thursday, and there were several days left until the house was blessed and something could happen to us. One afternoon, when I was alone with my mother watching TV, something happened to me that will always remain in my memory. My father took Josu and Beatriz to the garden. I liked to lie on my mother's lap while she started to caress my head. It was something I loved her to do. It helped me to fall asleep. I was falling asleep when I felt her start to pull my hair. I moved a little to let her know she was hurting me, but her hand became rough and she pulled me even more. And when I opened my eyes to tell her she was hurting me, I saw the face of that old woman in front of me. I had her a few inches away. I can remember the smell of her breath still, and her demonic face watching me. I quickly stepped aside and ran to the door, and before I went out, she grabbed me by the shoulder and pulled me towards her. I closed my eyes, and she shook me several times, but she held me back and told me that everything was fine. There I could hear my mother's voice telling me it was her, and not the witch. All day I was very nervous next to my mother. I asked her to leave the house and not to go inside until my father arrived with my brothers. She had me hugged to her chest, but I didn't feel very calm, and I was constantly looking at her thinking that she would change her shape. That afternoon was the only thing that happened to us, but in the night of that same day, something woke me up. I could hear someone walking upstairs with a stick. It was a very similar sound to the one the old lady made before. I remember turning to see my sister to make sure she was asleep, but she was staring at the ceiling in terror. I tried to reassure her that it was the old pipes, but she told me that she was more afraid of the face peeking through the ceiling. She said that as soon as she closed her eyes and opened them again, an old woman would come through the ceiling, and she would see her almost face to face. I told him to go to sleep next to me, and when he got into bed, he told me that he could hear the old woman hitting him with the stick. That night was very strange. We didn't know what was going on, but what we least expected was a horrible scream my brother made. We ran out of the room and I could see that my brother was floating in the air. Something seemed to have him tied by the neck and was lifting him up to the ceiling. I ran to pull him by the feet, but he kept going up until out of nowhere he was released and fell back on the couch. He was very scared and crying. My parents arrived a few seconds later. He was trying to tell them what happened, but he was short of breath. I told them what we saw and how we had found Joshua floating in the air. My mother insisted to my father that he had better hurry with the house blessing, or we would go somewhere else to live. Joshua woke up with a horrible mark on his neck that took several weeks to fade. By Friday, we were all sleeping in one room, which was our parents' room. It is horrible to feel that something that you do not see is cornering you in one place, which is your home, and you cannot do anything. Fortunately, that witch let us rest until Sunday arrived when we went to the priest. After Mass, my father approached the priest to tell him everything that was happening to us. He begged him to go and bless the house. The truth was very strange to me, that a person at the service of the community would be so adamant about helping. It took some work to get him to go to the house, and even though he was not completely convinced, he ended up helping us. When we arrived at the house, the priest mentioned to us that he could feel a very strong negative energy, that even his shoulders hurt, because he could feel that something very heavy had been dropped on his back. Priest prepared an incense, which caused a strong aroma inside the house. He told us that it was necessary to evoke a feeling of life in heaven. He asked us to hold hands and pray in Our Father, followed by a Hail Mary, and when we finished the prayers, we could hear the doors being banged again and again on the upper floor. The priest asked my father that only the two of them should go upstairs, as he did not want to risk our safety. I remember that it took them a long time to go downstairs, and while they were doing the blessing ritual on the first floor where we were, they began to thunder several things. You could hear how the dishes moved together. The doors made a strange noise, as if they had something inside. The Witch of the Duplex horror story. The light bulbs in the living room and bedrooms flickered, and even the one in the garage blew out. My mother was just telling us to stick together and stay close to her. By the time the priest and my father came downstairs, they found us in the dark in the middle of the living room. Finally, the priest blessed each one of us, praying to God for our safety. Somehow, that made me feel calmer, but C or Kira's comment to my father left me with a lot to think about. He mentioned to him that if that entity did not desist, we would have to give in for the good of all. A few months ago, there was a rumor that an old witch returned to where she used to live, but she did not know where she was, and that it was very certain that it was her. The following days and weeks were very quiet. We even thought that everything was solved. My father had time to investigate a little more of the property, and it turned out that previously the whole area was demolished to build new houses, but there were houses that seemed to have been abandoned for many years, were land that no one claimed, and thus took the liberty to rebuild the place. Everything seemed to be behind us. It was a bad chapter in our family that perhaps would remain in the past. The family recovered a little more economically, so my father decided to stop renting upstairs and told us that we could return to our rooms. And that night, was one of the last nights I spent in that home. I was asleep, and something began to bother my feet. I had the feeling that something was itching the soles of my feet, but each time it was more intense and annoying. I opened my eyes to see what it was, but there was nothing there. I thought maybe it was splinters from the base of my bed. I got off the bed and shook the mattress hard and went back to bed. But I felt that strange sensation again. I gathered my legs so as not to keep them stretched, and then I felt that something grabbed me by my feet and pulled me until I fell off the bed, and then took me under the bed. I tried to kick, but it wouldn't let go. Then I felt that something bit my ankle. It was the same as a dog bite, but a little smaller. My brother appeared, and when he saw me on the floor, he ran towards me and pulled me with force, managing to rescue me from whatever he could find under my bed. We ran out. My brother helped me walk because my foot hurt a lot. Luckily, my little sister was asleep with my parents because it would have been difficult for the three of us to go out together in my condition. The next day, I showed my parents what happened to me, and he told us something that was kept secret for several days that the priest told us. In one of the rooms, they found a lump that seemed to be hiding in one of the closets. They poured holy water on it, but could not get rid of it until the closet opened by itself, showing that there was nothing left. The priest told my father that if that witch, already dead, managed to touch us or hurt us physically, it was time to flee because it was already a very powerful evil entity. He thought it would not happen, and that is why he did not mention anything. But now he was more convinced that something was going on in that house and that he could not fight it. We ended up selling the house as a duplex. We did not mention anything to the new owners about what happened to us. Moreover, I came back many years after I got married and found that the house is abandoned. Who knows what else has happened to the new tenants? Thank you for joining us for this spine-tingling story. We hope you found it both thrilling and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this video, please consider participating in our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with your friends. Your support goes a long way in helping us create more engaging content for you. Goodbye, and may you always tread carefully in the world of the unknown.